Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, we're being told that today the Kohberger case is going to be in court, and hopefully they're going to set a trial date. I'm sure today they'll have some, what they refer to in the legal business as house cleaning type things. But we are all have been waiting for this case, especially the poor families of the victims, Zana Knodel, Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves. They have been waiting since November 13th, 2022, to get some justice in this case. And we all remember how after 6 weeks of the perpetrator in this case not being caught, there were those in the media screaming out for, is this a cold case? Should this case be handed over to the FBI? Will they ever catch this guy? Just absolute ridiculousness, because us professional law enforcement people that have worked homicides before know that it takes time. Identifying the perp, collecting the evidence, finding the correct direction in your investigative efforts. And when I was watching from afar and also reporting on this, hearing the media talk about how, is this a cold case, sort of got ridiculous. Not sort of, it was ridiculous, but they did it almost day one. It's, is this a cold case? And absolutely no. It was not a cold case. And with that, we feel that law enforcement has done an outstanding job. And let's not forget the law enforcement partners, right? The Moscow police, who are the catching agency, meaning they are the lead agency in this case, along with the FBI, the Idaho State Police, undoubtedly the district attorney's office investigators. So an expeditious arrest occurred, and now we're going on, November will be 2 years. Will they set a date? And when will the date be? Will the date be in 2025? I think there's no doubt about that. But when in 2025? And what are the strong points of this case for the prosecution? What are the weak points? How is science been brought into this case? And it has been brought into this case in several different areas, whether it be cell phone technology, DNA technology, the pinging of phones, forensic evidence, all of those things, the autopsy results, the stab wounds, the direction, the amount of the stab wounds, the knife sheath, of course, which everyone thinks or was assuming was the smoking gun, with the touch DNA coming back to Bryan Kohberger. How will the defense attorney refute that powerful evidence? Will they minimize it by saying, touch DNA could have gotten here through any means? But then we add the other evidence together and we come up with, I think, a strong evidentiary case. And that will remain to be seen, because we've seen other strong cases not get a conviction. So folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your wigs, hold on to your toupee, your children, your family members, your service dog. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Michael Bider.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Joining me today in analyzing this case is my compadre, former NYPD Sergeant, retired NYPD Sergeant, uh, current professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Michael Geary. Mike, welcome.
Hey, Bill, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show.
So, Mike, I think the court hearing is about to begin, but some of the things that I quickly went over that probably is going to be discussed. Of course, they're going to discuss a date, the discovery. I don't know if all the discovery is in, especially the discovery and the evidence collected by the FBI. That always seems to be a potential problem as to when that evidence comes forth. And what are your thoughts upon that?
Billy, it's about time we have a court date. You need a date certain. This case happened in late November 2023. And
No, actually 2022.
2022, yeah. Right. I was like, wait a second, I got my year wrong. That's how long it's been. So it's been since November 2022. You need justice for everyone. You need justice for Latah County, and you need justice for all the family, the Gonsalves family, the Morgan family, the Kernodle family, and the Chapin family. And you also need justice for Kohberger. Now, he might be very content to sit back and let justice take its time. But the fact is, you got to get this going. It doesn't serve anybody's purpose to, and since, a not guilty plea has been entered into his, on his record, because he hasn't spoken yet in court, the perception is that he's pleading not guilty. So therefore, you would think that someone like that would want the case handled as soon as possible. So hopefully it'll happen. I'm thinking, like you've talked about this, and Phil and I have talked about this. We've all done it. Probably summer, a year from now, maybe in the summer of 2025. It won't be soon enough. It's about time.
Absolutely, Mike. I'm going to put it right up on the screen. Here we go, right to the
present in the courtroom is Mr. Kohberger, represented by Ms. Taylor, and Ms. Massett and Mr. Logston are participating over Zoom remotely. The state is represented by Mr. Thompson and Ms. Jennings, Latah County Prosecutor's Office, and Mr. Nye and Ms. Beatty are participating over Zoom remotely. So we're here for a scheduling order, and I think we're about 13 months from the arraignment, and I think at this point, this is my opinion, that we're getting to a point of diminishing returns, and I sent to council last Friday on a proposed scheduling order for a lot of things, deadlines, including setting the trial. And so I also have set this hearing so that we can discuss this and see where everybody is. So let me start with the state. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Honor. We've reviewed the court's proposed scheduling order with the attorney team, and we are agreeable to it. It makes sense that we do the trial in the summertime when high school is out across the street and when the university is out and the conflicting activities. And the schedule that Your Honor proposes is acceptable to the state. I would note just a minor detail that June 19th is also a legal holiday. The court specified July 4th as a legal holiday. We wouldn't be able to hold trial, but
Sure.
19th as well. Other than that, we have no objection to the court's proposal.
All right, thank you. I mean, as I went through all of this, I mean, there's going to be a lot of motions, a lot of hearings, a lot of work. There already has been a significant amount of work, as we all know. And when I tried to balance this out, I do think it was it's pretty fair, balanced, and I hope realistic. So, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Judge. Your Honor, first, I know the court has listed this as taking place in Latah County. We haven't been heard on our change of venue yet. That's to come.
Totally understand that.
So I don't want anybody thinking I'm agreeing to Latah County is all. The June of 2025, that's the time frame that we have been working towards. I am hopeful that we can come in there. We're working towards that date. I think it's reasonable to set that date. As the court's aware, mitigation is something that takes a significant amount of time. We've had that underway since the day we took this case. We continue to work that very hard. I spoke with our mitigation expert last night about this date. And there's a lot of work yet to be done, but we're still working towards that. So I think it's reasonable to set that. I just want the court to know that that's not finished at this point. That's very much ongoing, and new things are coming out that we need to follow up. But with that said, I think it's reasonable to go ahead and pick the June of 2025 as a trial date at this time.
And by the way, I think you understand that, all counsel understand that, but this is a 3-month trial. So I was calculating 2 weeks to set the jury, then 8 weeks of trial, and then 2 weeks for mitigation and sentencing. And I mean, that's a guess, but I think it's enough time for all of those things to take care of. And obviously, the last 2 weeks would only be if Mr. Kohberger was convicted. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. I do want to bring up a couple of issues I have with some of the deadlines. I looked this over. Our team has talked about it. I've gone over this with Mr. Kohberger. I do have a couple of concerns about the deadlines, and I'll just bring those up to the court for the court's consideration. As far as motions challenging the death penalty, and that's in right under motion practice letter A that the court has on its draft, we can have a lot of those filed by September 5th. I would note for the court that that's ahead of the state's final discovery date, and that's ahead of the state's deadline to produce its aggravation case that it will use. We can meet this September 5th deadline, but we're going to ask the court to give us a little leeway when there's something new that comes our way. If there's an amendment to a motion or a new motion that becomes relevant based on something new, we'd like a 2-week window after receiving something new to file that. But the bulk of it we can get in by the deadline that the court has asked here, and that's just not a problem.
Sure, I understand that. I looked at that. I wanted to have that early because, it's a bigger question.
Yeah.
And I was aware of the Ross case. I think you had 16 motions in that case. So I wanted to sort of address those issues early.
Your Honor, we can definitely do that. We can address a lot of things early. We just don't want to be precluded from bringing an amended motion or a new motion if something new is filed that would have been relevant to something we've already filed.
I'm not going to prevent you from doing that.
Perfect, thank you.
And by the way, a lot of these deadlines, you can certainly do them earlier if you'd like to. I would encourage everybody to do that. Thank you.
Your Honor, then moving on, the motions in limine under letter C, the court has suggested February 13th as the date for that. I think in large part we can do some by then, but the exhibits that we'll exchange and witness lists that we'll exchange aren't due until after that. And again, I think there might be additional motions that would be relevant after those things have been exchanged. So if the court wanted to move the whole deadline so we had all of those motions in limine at once, I think that would be reasonable. But if the court wants to keep this deadline, as long as we have the ability to bring more motions in limine based on new filings, we'll be okay with that as well.
Sure. And I was also thinking about you know, yeah, I guess experts, for example, I mean, they may have longer hearings that, you know, we're going to have to work through all of these things. I mean, this is just a structure.
Thank you. The court had listed March 14th as a trial brief date, and that is ahead of some of the other deadlines, recognizing that the trial is the innocence phase and the sentencing phase, if it happens, is the mitigation and aggravation. I would just say this is a fine deadline, but we won't be touching anything to do with our mitigation by then, if that's what the court anticipated.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I think well, yeah, we had March 3rd for mitigation. I figured by then you would pretty much have that in hand.
We hope to. That brings me to the last point I wanted to talk about. The court has proposed setting a mutual exchange of aggravation and mitigation materials, and I'd ask the court to reconsider that. We will aim for our March 3rd deadline. That's our plan right now. If something changes that, then we'll come back and let the court know and talk to counsel. But would ask that the state's aggravation package be provided to us earlier than the same day as our mitigation. Should we get to that point, the state has the burden of establishing the statutory aggravators. There are some things I think I might be able to guess about how the state's going to try to present information, but I don't think I should have to guess. I think I should have that information well ahead of providing the mitigation that will be presented in response to any aggravating information that's presented by the state. So I'd ask the court to set the date for the state to produce its information much earlier than ours. The state filed its notice a year ago yesterday, and I have a lot of questions about what the state would intend to use to try to establish many of the statutory aggravators they've listed. I know I've heard the court talk about super due process in a capital case, and I think it's appropriate for us to be on notice and be provided discovery, to be provided a full range of what the state intends to use to establish those if we ever get to that point. And I think we need those ahead of our deadline for mitigation. So I'd ask the court to move that deadline up quite a bit earlier. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thompson, do you have any issues about having the aggravation in advance for a period of time?
No, sir. As long as we will have the option, the ability to supplement that once we see whatever the defense plans to offer in the way of mitigation.
Well, I'm appreciating that, you know, with these deadlines, that we're going to have supplement all the way along. I just don't want to be scrambling around a month before the trial. We're all going to be very, very busy. And the more we can resolve certain motions, you know, supplements, whatever we need to do, I'm trying to do this sooner than later.
Yes, sir. And that's our preference as well.
And Ms. Taylor as well.
Yes, Your Honor.
But just to make sure, though, I mean, you have to do your job, and the state has to do its job, and I have to do my job. But I think this is a great step, okay, to set these deadlines and hearings so that we can move through this. It's going to take a while, but anything else we need to address today, Mr. Thompson?
I don't believe so. Thank you.
Ms. Taylor?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, well, it's very short, and I'm grateful that everybody's working together. Thank you. Okay. Take care, everybody. We are adjourned.
Mike, very short and sweet, but however, a lot of important issues were covered there. Let's go to the first one that, of course, Ann Taylor raised, and that is the change of venue. Did you see how she
Right.
slipped that one in there?
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's a huge thing for the people of Latah County, the people of the town of Moscow, for the Idaho state. This did so much damage to Latah County, to Idaho State University, to Moscow. No one wants this from that town, wants this move to another venue, purportedly to give Bryan Kohberger a chance at a more, let's say, fair trial. Can he get a fair trial in Latah County, Mike?
Well, theoretically he can, yes. But if you want to change the venue as a defense attorney, you have the burden of proving that there's too much prejudicial animosity out there already, and too many people in the jury pool already, in the potential jury pool, because you haven't picked them yet, potential jury pool already have their mind made up. It's very difficult to do. Defense attorneys rarely win these motions because once a judge says, no, I'm not going to honor that motion. I'm going to deny that motion. We're going to pick our jury. We're going to go to trial. At the day that you're picking the jury, the 2 days that you're picking the jury, the defense attorney always has the ability to ask the question, what they call voir dire, the panel. So therefore, I don't think so. A lot of time has passed. This is not summer of 2023 where things were different. It's now 2024. We're going to be going to 2025. Passions have settled a little bit. She'll have all the discovery. She will have figured out by then her questioning of people. We covered this before. Her questioning of people with questionnaires on the street. What's your attitude and things like that. She's hoping for some convincing information in order to get the judge to say, look, it's too doubtful. So we're not even going to impanel a jury and let me question them here in Latah, where it's so bad, we need to extricate it and move it to another place. They're rarely granted, and I'm glad they're really granted, because under the Constitution of the state and of the U.S. Constitution, the defendant has the right to the defendant's right to actually have the case in the location where the crime is alleged to have occurred. I don't think she'll be successful.
Mike, the other big issue when we were listening is you mentioned voir dire, and that this takes on a bigger and a more important meaning because this is a death penalty case. Therefore, within the voir dire and the questioning and the challenges that each side gets, the defense and the prosecution, they each get, I don't know exactly the number, 2 or 3 disqualifications, and purportedly for no reason at all. They could just have a feeling. But with the death penalty case, it makes it that much more difficult because each juror must be able to convict when they know that the death penalty is on the table. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Billy, that case went. I can't think of the name of the case, but that case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court many years ago on that very issue. The Supreme Court decided yes, if it is a death penalty case, you have to have a jury that is qualified to accept the fact that if they find a person guilty, that they know there's a possibility they'll be executed. Because you don't want the jury nullification. You don't want to have a jury full of people who say, well, he may be guilty, but I don't want to find him guilty because he's more likely to be given the death penalty. So therefore, we're going to nullify all of the evidence and all of the state's evidence. We're just going to say not guilty or find him guilty of a lesser charge. So therefore, he's not actually eligible to accept the death penalty. So people will have to reveal their true feelings about the death penalty. And so therefore, if they convict, they have to be willing to convict, knowing that there will be a second phase, as the judge said, a 2-week, mitigation aggravation section if they do convict him of the murders, to then decide we're going to have another little miniature trial, just working out aggravating and mitigating factors, and they have to be willing if they find statutory aggravating factors exist and no mitigating factors exist, that they can vote to put him to death, sentence him to death. That's important for Bill Thompson. It's important for Idaho, and it makes a regular, I don't mean to be callous, but like say a case where maybe there's one person who's been killed and it's not a death penalty case. You have 4. It's a lot more emotional. It's a lot tougher. It's a lot more stressful on the jury. So you want to make sure that you have a jury that understands all the consequences of the potential consequences of a guilty verdict, and that they can accept the consequences of that guilty verdict.
100%. Obviously, one of the what many would say is the most powerful pieces of evidence in this case is right up on the screen. It's not the knife, because the knife was never recovered, but we see underneath that knife, the knife sheath for a K-bar knife. It's a Marine Corps knife sheath. And on that knife sheath was found what's known as touch DNA. Now, none of us right here are DNA experts, but many people would say, well, how did the DNA of Bryan Kohberger get on that knife sheath if he didn't commit this crime? That is a large hill for the defense to climb, but there are ways to poke holes in it. And for the explanation on this, I have one of the foremost DNA experts in the country, and CeCe Moore, who was on CNN back when this occurred, and she gave a very good explanation to this. I just want to play this now.
Every time, it's how the suspect in the mid-November stabbing deaths of 4 Idaho students was finally tracked down and arrested. That's what we learned when the affidavit of probable cause was unsealed in Idaho court this week. Investigators had found a leather knife sheath on the bed of one of the victims. They found a DNA sample on the button of the sheath. This and the cell phone records tracing his whereabouts capped the many weeks-long investigation that included narrowing down which white Hyundai Elantra had been captured on videos in the neighborhood of the house where the killings took place. A Washington State University officer then located a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra in an apartment complex parking lot. The owner's driver's license information and photograph were consistent with a surviving roommate's description of the masked suspect's height and build and bushy eyebrows. Additionally, 5 days after the murders, the suspect had obtained a new license plate for his car. The car was located at the suspect's family residence in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. CNN has reported he was under surveillance, and he was seen cleaning his car inside and out using surgical gloves and depositing trash in the wee hours in a neighbor's garbage can. On December 27, Pennsylvania law enforcement discovered that trash and sent it to the Idaho State Lab for DNA testing. The very next day, the lab was able to match a DNA profile obtained from the trash as all but assured as being from the biological father to a person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath. As the document states, at least 99.9998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. Joining me now is CeCe Moore, head of genetic genealogy services for Parabon Nanolabs Law Enforcement Unit, which has made more than 200 successful identifications of violent criminals. She's not worked the Idaho case. She stars in the documentary series The Genetic Detective, now streaming on ABC, and she has worked on all 10 seasons of the PBS television documentary series Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr. CeCe, thank you for being here. What does this mean? Single source of male DNA, which I'm reading from the affidavit.
It means there were no other DNA detected on that, meaning sometimes you can have a mixture. You can have multiple people's DNA. You want to have single source DNA if at all possible, because that really just ties that one person to that item. Now, it was likely that this was touch DNA. Certainly it's possible there was blood. They didn't tell us what type of DNA, but most likely it was touch DNA. And that would typically be just a few skin cells. This might have been a very small amount of DNA, but because of today's technological advances, we can detect even the tiniest bit of DNA.
How reliable is touch DNA if it is skin cells in comparison to, say, blood?
It's a great question. It is more transferable. So, of course, you would like to have blood. You would like to have semen or saliva, and they might. They haven't shown all their cards. We don't know all that they have. But touch DNA, now that we can use it because of the sensitivity of our equipment, it also means you have to be more cautious about using DNA as your only evidence. So it's a really positive thing that they clearly have other evidence. This is just one piece of it. We have seen touch DNA transfer in other cases. Of course, it's fairly rare, but it is something that you have to be aware of and make sure that there are other aspects of the case also pointing at the same person.
So, Mike, super interesting. Let me just reach out. Protected for Life. Thank you for the $9.99 super sticker. Hi, do you believe they have to move to a larger city for new venue? We have addressed that earlier. I don't believe that. I know that the defense will be pushing for that. I think the people of Latah County, the people of Moscow, the people of the state of Idaho deserve their justice in the county that this crime was committed in the city, that the jurors coming from the area, they're worried about jurors being prejudiced because this, in fact, did happen in Latah County. I don't think that the judge will grant the change of venue. Mike, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Ms. Taylor would really like to have this over in a city like Boise, Idaho, maybe the largest city in Idaho, where she'll get maybe a group of people, and then she'll have maybe more differing views on the death penalty, differing views on guilt and innocence, because they were not so directly affected. But I don't think it'll work. I think this case is so horrific. And if you have this scientific DNA evidence, you've got cell phone evidence, you got the pictures from the security cameras, the white Hyundai that evening, that early morning, I think no matter where she goes, he would be toast. I don't think going to Boise is going to help, but I think that's what she's looking for. I think John Judge, pretty soon in the future, probably in the next 30 days, is just going to slam that door shut on Ann Taylor.
So we look at that knife sheath again. The knife was not recovered, and people will have questions about that. Where is the knife? Where is the knife? People will always want to know. Well, I think if Bryan Kohberger had the perfect crime, he wouldn't have left the knife sheath there either, but he did, and that obviously was a mistake. Now, CeCe Moore, the person we've played on the CNN video, she is one of the foremost experts on this technology in the country, as well as Orthrem Labs that has done a lot of the DNA work in what's known as investigative genetic genealogy, where they build family trees, and they've done unbelievable work. So one of the big things that I always worry about is, what if the defense hires a CeCe Moore to refute this evidence? And what if someone as prominent as her comes up with all the what ifs? And that's how the defense pokes holes in the prosecution's case. And we've seen it, Mike. What is the truth? Where is the truth lie when experts can poke holes in science? We always think science is the last stop. There's no other stop. The science says this, then you get two different scientists who says, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Your thought?
Yeah, I am sure that Ann Taylor will have a DNA specialist. I would imagine the DNA specialist is probably someone who's worked in a lab like that. Maybe they've written papers on it. Maybe they presented it all kinds of places around the world, and they're considered experts. However, the jury will have to probably make up their mind which expert sounds more convincing, which expert is more likely to have the newest technological information at their fingertips and analysis. Because you may have somebody, as you Phil have seen this and I've seen this, if you were an expert on DNA up until say 2021, 2001, and now you're called into court to be a DNA expert, all that information that you had gathered to 2021, a lot of it is no longer good anymore, and it's been surpassed by the technological revolution in DNA retrieval and analysis. So if she has someone who's been sorry, out of the game for a while, it may not be so good. But they will absolutely have a DNA specialist to say, well, yeah, it seems like 99.99998, but if maybe there was some degradation of the material, then it wouldn't be 99.999998 exclusion. It would be, say, 1 in 3, something like that. You could just have some sort of play with the mathematics, with the numbers, and what ifs, what about this, what about that? And the jury's going to have to sift through it. And that on a case like this, yeah, there's high profile cases. We're going to see this in the Rex Sherman case in New York. I'm sure there's going to be an expert for the defense trying to refute the state's case. Absolutely.
Mike, I was more thinking of saying that the defense may say, oh, Bryan Kohberger was previously inside that house. Because that house was known to have huge raucous parties. Mm-hmm. And basically, they didn't know everyone that was there. What if the defense tries something like that? I mean, I wouldn't, if I was a juror, I don't think I would buy it, but that certainly could be one of the things that they would mention. Let me go back to CeCe Moore. We'll finish up her little interview here.
CeCe, good news, I guess. It's hard to commit murder without leaving something behind.
That's right. Yeah, I've been saying this for weeks. That type of violent, intimate crime, it is virtually impossible not to leave something behind, even if you are a criminology PhD student. So I am not at all surprised they were able to find something. Even if he tried hard not to leave something, you still would. And that is great news, because what it means is that anyone who perpetrates this type of crime in the future should be aware that they will be identified. They will be caught. There really is no reason that we should see serial killers, serial rapists moving forward. This guy, potentially could have become a Ted Bundy or even a Zodiac, not identified 50 years later. But because of the DNA technology, the advances that we're seeing, both in investigative genetic genealogy and the ability to use tiny amounts of DNA, we can identify someone, whether they are in the law enforcement database or not.
CeCe, the cases that you have cracked, for which you have become famous, are the cases that necessitate you putting together, in connection with a private lab, a very complicated family history, family tree, and tracing back cousins and generations. That doesn't seem to be what took place here.
Well, I don't think we can reach that conclusion yet. Investigative genetic genealogy is simply a tip. It's a lead generator. It should never be used as evidence against a suspect. And so it is proper that it would have been left out of the affidavit, in my opinion, because it should not form the basis of an arrest warrant. And so even though they didn't put it in there, I don't think we can rule it out. We don't know whether it was what initially identified him as a person of interest, and then they looked more closely at that tip about the car, or it could have gone the other way, where they identified him through that tip about the car, and at the same time they were working on the genetic genealogy and may have built his family tree to see if it was consistent with what they were seeing. I have done that in some cases. If there are persons of interest, you can very quickly rule them out or potentially not be able to exclude them, which is what would have happened in this case. Maybe they could have connected him to one or more of those matches, maybe a second, third, fourth cousin, and said, look, this is somebody who is a strong person of interest. So I think there's still a lot for us to learn on what happened here. I do think it is highly likely that an advanced private outside lab was used, at least somehow in this case. We've all been hearing whispers of this. There's been lots of leaks that investigative genetic genealogy was used. So I do think that they were at least trying to, or in the process of doing so.
And you make a great point. They of course don't have to put in this affidavit of probable cause. They, the prosecutors, all that they have. See,
Amazing. Let me just go. Erin Kelly, thank you so much for the 50-pound super sticker. Guilty, get the Guinness ready. Well, it hasn't gone to trial yet. And, this is going to be a very interesting case. And I just, CeCe Moore that was one of the best interviews in regards to information and educating us, the true crime community, on the use of investigative genetic genealogy. And one of the things she said, which everyone should take away from this, is that it should never be used as the basis for an arrest. However, in conjunction with other evidence, it should be just a clue. And that is so important. And she said that so well and educated us so well, because it's not the only evidence they have. It's the evidence that makes their other evidence much more powerful. And realizing that, and this was about that interview on CNN had to be over a year ago. Since that, DNA has even advanced even further. And the lab she was referring to, without saying their name, is Othram Labs, that did the identification in the Rachel Marin case, the case that was recently solved with the arrest of that Venezuelan gangbanger, that did the home invasion in Los Angeles. They matched that DNA up to the Rachel Marin case. And I apologize if I said Venezuela. I think it may have been El Salvador. It was El Salvador. They did a investigative genetic genealogical tree. They were able to find the town he was from, came up with some family members, and they locked him up at a bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Unbelievable. When CeCe Moore said, in the future, there will be no more serial killers. There will be no more serial rapists, because science will catch them before they get to become serial. Mike.
Billy, it's fantastic. It opens up a whole new world for law enforcement, and it's a gift. It's a scientific gift. Like, I guess, imagine maybe 130 years ago, something like fingerprints, and realizing that they're, unique. It just blows your mind to say, wow, okay, we can solve a whole lot more. That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. And she's right. When you look at the documents by the state of Washington, when they did the search warrant of Kohberger's apartment after he'd gone, they talked about the DNA and saying, look, just to let you know, if there's ever a time that the DNA is ever excluded for any reason under the Constitution, this does not in any way, shape, or form destroy the probable cause or lessen the probable cause for the issuance of the search warrant in the first place. So that's an excellent disclaimer. And that, because as she said, it's a clue. As you say, it's a clue. It puts you in the right direction, but by itself, it cannot stand alone to convict. You've got to have more than that. You have to have, or to arrest, you have to have something else that fits in, that backs up and identifies the person. We're talking about the Hyundai early on. I remember me and Phil doing a show about the Hyundai. And you said when Chief Fry put out a bulletin to say, if there was ever anybody who was driving around in a white Hyundai with the owner and or the occupant, please come and talk to us. He said it really nicely at Leta, at the Moscow PD headquarters. We'd really like to talk to you. And you said, that's it. So they really had that information first. They double checked. They figured out about Kohberger. So really the information for the touch DNA connecting Bryan Kohberger to his father, that happened much later. They already had this guy in their sights. They were tailing him across country. They really had a lot of information already, circumstantial information already on this guy, and that's really good. So the DNA just puts the cherry on top of the sundae, so to speak.
Absolutely. Isaac Cole, thank you for the 499 pound super sticker. Thank you very much. Really much appreciated. When we go back and we look at some of the evidence, and it sort of brings us back to, where we were on November 13th, 2022, and how shocked, and how, as I stated earlier, how many broadcast stations after 6 weeks said, "Is this a cold case?" And when I heard that, I cringed. It's just like many of you in the chat are mentioning Howard Bloom and his book. Howard Bloom is a hack. All right. He's just a New York Times writer. No, and as I said and I'll stand by it, he couldn't find a bad guy in a state prison with the help of the warden. But yet everyone's reading his book as if this guy knows what he's talking about. And I watched his interviews. All he does is chew on his glasses. He's like this. He's a real arrogant, he's chewing on his glasses. I go, yeah, I'm going to believe anything this guy says. I don't know that. I don't know if that's the litmus test to disqualify somebody, but we followed him. We actually did a show on him over a year ago. And look, he rushed his book out because he had no idea when this case happened that, almost 2 years from a year and a half, 2 years, they haven't set a trial date yet. They set a tentative date. He wanted to knock that book out because he wanted to strike when the iron was hot. The iron has cooled off a little bit, And so who ever heard of writing a book when the ending's not known yet, but he did that. I want to play this. This will bring us back to the case earlier on.
Today, shackled and silent, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger was led into a Pennsylvania courthouse where he waived his extradition rights. The PhD candidate in criminology agreeing to be returned without a fight to Idaho, where he's accused of stabbing 4 college students to death in November.
No words can heal the pain associated with the loss of a child. Their young lives were ended far too soon.
Pennsylvania State Police talking this afternoon about Kohberger's arrest there last week.
The information was held very close, and we did not want to have any situation where Mr. Kohberger potentially would be tipped off.
And tonight, new police footage showing Kohberger in Indiana just last month. The murder suspect and his father making the cross-country drive from Washington State to Pennsylvania and getting pulled over twice on I-70 east of Indianapolis for tailgating. An Indiana state trooper seen in the body camera video approaching the car. Bryan Kohberger was in the driver's seat.
Where at? PA? Where at? PA?
Bryan Kohberger.
I just wanted to. I'm trying. His right hand in this little video. Still, I'm going to pull it back a little further. Watch his right hand. He's got a big, like 5 or 6 inch cut on his right hand.
Was seen in the body camera video approaching.
Look at that on his right. You see that? Can you guys see that? On his right hand, probably a couple of inches south of his wrist.
Right.
You see that?
Right along the ridge.
Right. That's right from the body cam video. So
approaching the car.
There we go. Even better shot. Now, potentially, that's a cut from the assault because
Bryan
we said
Kohberger was in the driver's seat.
We said numerous times when there is a knife attack that usually the assailant, especially one as violent as this one where 4 people were murdered, usually the assailant, the killer, cuts himself. And if we look back at that, that's what it appears to be, that he cut himself.
An Indiana state trooper seen in the body camera video approaching the car.
So then we would ask, where is the blood inside the crime scene? Did he potentially have thick enough gloves or thick enough clothing that the blood stayed on his clothing and didn't drop inside the crime scene? That's a potential. But look, I think that's pretty clear. He's got a cut on his hand, on his right hand there, up about 3 inches. I guess you would say north of his wrist if you were using that direction.
Bryan Kohberger was in the driver's seat.
Where at? PA? It's a long haul. You guys scared of airplanes?
For weeks, investigators had been looking for a white Hyundai Elantra that was spotted near the Idaho crime scene. But Kohberger was released with just a warning after both traffic stops. Indiana State Police saying in a statement that at the time, quote, there was no information available on a suspect for the crime in Idaho or any identifying information or any specific information related to that car.
So here's what will happen next. Within the next 10 days, Kohberger will be returned to Idaho. Once he's there, he'll be served with an arrest warrant for 4 counts of first-degree murder. Then the probable cause affidavit will be unsealed. That should give us much more information about his alleged involvement in the killings. Also late tonight, a judge issued a new order that prohibits police or attorneys from speaking publicly about this case moving forward. Kohberger has continued to maintain his innocence.
So, that, of course, was around the time he was arrested. And K-Me, thank you so much for the $5 super sticker. Thanks, Bill and Michael. Great coverage, like always. Well, thank you. We're sort of doing a recap on what went on in this case. But is there a possibility, Mike, that there is blood evidence in the house and the prosecution hasn't released that yet?
Yeah. I mean, there's a probably we know just the tip of the iceberg's worth. There's a lot more information. Look, when we do your arrest affidavit and they include a lot of information, you only have to establish to the judge's satisfaction probable cause. You don't have to prove that your entire case to the judge like a prosecutor will at trial. You have to prove probable cause. There's probably a lot more, and they'll, of course, give that to Ann Taylor, but that's for the trial. Yeah, so I am sure that there's information about blood because in that kind of attack, he may have dropped just a few drops of blood is all is needed. I'm sure people were on their hands and knees collecting blood samples for weeks after that case. I would be shocked if I'd be really shocked if that was the only DNA that connects him to the case, besides the buccal swab. If that was his only DNA at the crime scene, I'd be really shocked about that.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, hit the like button, share us with your friends, your family, your enemies. Maybe your enemies will become friends if you share an episode of Police Off the Cuff. Also, if you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with, count them, 5 different levels. And we appreciate all you guys that are subscribed, our friends, our family, even if you're not subscribed, if you're just listening to us. This case is amazing because, Mike, if there was blood, for example, if there's blood evidence inside this crime scene that comes back to Kohberger, is it all over?
To me, absolutely.
Well, I don't mean to you because you and I have a lower threshold of evidentiary meaning. And I think, if his blood was in that crime scene and they show that, look, in the O.J. Simpson case, and I always point back to this case, his blood was in the crime scene. And that wasn't enough. That was called jury nullification in that case, right?
Yeah.
But if in this case, where we don't have all those other issues involved, if Bryan Kohberger's blood is found in this crime scene, let's just put it another way. How powerful is that?
Yeah, Billy, I mean, you could talk about transferring, DNA. If he had been in that apartment or that house, if he'd been in there like in the beginning of the semester, maybe there was a party, welcome back to school party, and he got himself in there, and maybe he left some touch DNA on a chair or on a wall or something like that, you'd have to believe that DNA that was left over was touched by a detective and who then touched a perfectly clean sheath and then wiped the Kohberger's DNA on that sheath without getting his own DNA on that sheath. So, it would be kind of a stretch to say, oh, that was transfers from another time when he was there. So that's ridiculous. Now you talk about blood. Okay, he may have been there. Maybe he did leave DNA on an ashtray or something like that. But people come to your house for a pool party, hanging out and drinking. They usually don't leave blood. They don't bleed in your house. You'd really remember something like that. So if there's a drop of blood, or if he has taken a trophy, if he kept a trophy, like an ID from one of the girls or from Mr. Chapin or a picture, something like that, just something, if he just decided to take something as a trophy and they found it in Pennsylvania or something like that, or in his closet in Washington, that would, to me, I would think that would slam shut the door, because what's your explanation for that? That'd be really powerful.
Absolutely. Jaded, he never stalked them. Did you not watch the last hearing? They admitted they had no proof of that. He never stalked them. Jaded, you're 100% correct. And so much misinformation came out about this case because there was so much information, period, that much of it was not vetted and it was not correct. I mean, remember all the food truck? My God, they had the guy that was standing near them tried and convicted, and he had nothing to do with it.
There was poor bartender.
Yeah, they had so many other false pieces of evidence in this case because people talk, how rumors spread. And remember the People magazine article about Bryan Kohberger had gone into the restaurant that both Kaylee and Madison Mogan worked at? That was totally not true. But it was put out by, I don't know how respected People is, but it was put out, and then it was reported by News Nation, Ashley Banfield, as if it was true. It was not true. It was absolutely not true. Jaded, not an opinion, it was facts. Why don't people still spread rumors is what I'm saying. They have zero evidence of him stalking any of them. Jaded, you're 100% correct. They don't. And you know something? We don't. But one of the things, Jaded, that we don't know for a fact, we don't know digitally, did he have any correspondence when any of the victims via Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or any of those things that I'm so unqualified even to talk about, but there's other, modes of communication. Did he have any of that? And does law enforcement have that as evidence? Those are some of the things that we don't know. But, as you said, that's why when I mentioned Howard Bloom, Howard Bloom is not qualified to talk about who he targeted first. He's a writer, and he's putting that out there as if he's investigated hundreds of homicides. He's just a New York Times writer who now writes fiction. So a lot of folks are taking this book as, oh my God, he's saying, I don't care what Howard Bloom says. I really don't. Mike.
Bill, yeah, don't buy. If anybody's out there who hasn't bought the book, don't buy the book. He's never investigated a single homicide. He's never been at a single crime scene. He's never worked from midnight to 8 in the Bronx or Brooklyn or Manhattan where somebody gets shot and you got to handle the crime scene, investigate, talk to people, he's never filled out a police report. He's never done any of those things. He's an imaginative writer. He's got a great style, but that's it. So everything that he's written in that book has been taken from open sources, stuff that he's seen on TV and from maybe Ms. Banfield and other places like that, Court TV, whatever it happens to be, newspaper articles. That's what he's using as his sources.
Mike, to his discredit, and not to his discredit, to the media's discredit, they interview him as if he's this expert on crime. And, he's a writer. And I tell you the truth, he's an excellent writer. I will give him that.
Absolutely.
He's an excellent writer. I do not like the man. He's obnoxious and he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's an excellent, if you just wanted to buy the book because he's an excellent writer, he is. I'll give him that. He's an excellent writer. But it's the whole media thing where they're interviewing this man as if he's a former FBI, former DNA expert, former crime scene expert, former first grade. He's none of those. He's a writer, so just use your head when you ask questions. April S., there are people trying to make money off of this situation. It's sick. There's not just one person. There's many people that are. I think James Patterson, the best-selling author, is in the process of putting out a book on the same topic. Will he wait to the trial? It seemed like Howard Bloom, that was his intentions. But Lou Lamoracco, Bloom's book, Half Fantasy. Good grief. Lou, something, you're preaching to the choir. When we read it all the book is the chapters that came out on Airmail magazine. So if you read those chapters as they were coming out, you already read the book because that's the book.
Right.
He was writing for Airmail magazine. Now you put it together in this fictional novel. And, you look, the thing is, as I said, he's going on all types of media and they're putting him out there as this expert. He's not an expert on anything. I want to play this here.
They have their man in the murder of 4 University of Idaho students. We're taking a look at some of the biggest pieces of evidence laid out in the probable cause affidavit and seeing where the defense might be able to poke some holes. Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Young college students to death is sitting behind bars in an Idaho jail. This as his public defender and prosecutors from Latah County prepare for what's sure to be a very long legal process. Since Kohberger's arrest in Pennsylvania a week ago and the release of the probable cause document on his return to Idaho, we have learned more about the investigation into the quadruple murder. Law enforcement sources told CNN that the Hyundai Elantra that Kohberger was driving was cleaned from top to bottom by the suspect. During surveillance of his parents' in Pennsylvania home and Kohberger's movements, sources told the media outlet that the 28-year-old doctoral student was seen wearing surgical gloves. Investigators believe Kohberger killed Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Zaina Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin inside of a rented home not far from the University of Idaho campus. At the time of the murders, Kohberger was studying at Washington State University, which is just a few miles away from the crime scene. When the semester was over, he and his father took a road trip across the United States in that very Hyundai Elantra back to Pennsylvania. I'm joined by my co-hosts and legal analyst, public defender Brian Buckmeyer, former trial attorney Terry Austin. All three of us have had a chance to look over this affidavit, and while there is a lot of evidence against Kohberger, it's not as airtight as people might think. Brian, you're a defense attorney. Where do you see the problems?
All right, I'll start with the first one. The pinging of the phone associated with Kohberger is strong evidence, but it isn't without holes that the defense can argue. Using cell towers to track a suspect is a common practice amongst police officers and can be very helpful, but when you start digging a little deeper, doubt may grow. Whether it's reasonable is up for the jury to decide. Cell phone towers can have a radius of up to 25 miles. Many, especially in urban areas, can pinpoint a person's phone to a closer than a mile because there are so many towers in a given area. Kohberger's phone pinged off the towers that's in the area of the murders. That could be only maybe 5 to 10 miles radius or maybe less. And when the school is 7 to 8 miles away, that doesn't tell us much. In terms of the path of the vehicle, that's more art than.
But you know something, one of the things when we talk about connecting the dots of the investigation, yes, this gentleman is correct. Well, I don't know if he's totally correct in a lot of the self, because we saw unbelievable cell phone evidence in the Kansas mom's case in Oklahoma. And they pinpointed the cell phones to where they were buried. And these were burner phones. So I think the technology of tracking cell phones is even further along than we knew during the Idaho case. I mean, it just seems like the technology is getting better and better every day for law enforcement, for tracking these phones. So before I agree with him, I have to say, well, I'm not an expert on it, but I've seen cases where they're pinpointing to within a few feet where these damn phones are. And Oklahoma, you think there's tons of cell towers all over the state of Oklahoma? I think not, you know. But yes, every single case we've seen, now it comes down to science, right? The science of cell phone pinging, of technology, of calls, of text messages in and out, the science of DNA, the science of investigative genetic genealogical, it's just unbelievable. And so before we, allow the defense to poke holes in things, let's understand the technology. And again, none of us, unless there's someone in the chat right now who is a cell phone tower expert, have that expertise to say that they can't pinpoint him. But what I was going to say, when you connect the dots, not only do they have the cell phone tower and pinging evidence, but they have video of his car coming into the complex. Yes, can they put him in the car? No, they can't. But can they put his car on the scene? Yes. So circumstantially, when we connect the dots, it becomes much more powerful evidence, Mike.
Yeah, he even agreed. The gentleman, before he started talking, he said, yes, it is reliable. It's relevant. It's used by law enforcement. So therefore, they use it every day to track someone and get information on someone. So it is absolutely accurate. So they have to actually admit that first, but then say, but it's not as accurate, Mr. and Mrs. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as you think. There are some variations in how accurate it is. So they actually have to accede to the fact that A, it is accurate, but B, say, but, take a look at it this way. So, it'll be up to the jury to determine, but even if they could poke a tiny bit of hole here and there, the fact is, it's not all, what are you going to say? It's all coincidence. That happens to be the white Hyundai. It happens to be the phone. It happens to be the DNA. There's a lot of coincidences in this case leading up to this one person who's at the defense table, ladies and gentlemen, that sort of thing. Yeah, he has to admit to that it is accurate, but he's just trying to say, well, it's just kind of not as accurate as you might think. Okay. I mean, that's a good argument. The defense is entitled to make it, but in the eyes of the jury, after they see all that evidence over like the course of 2 months, you wonder how relevant that's going to be to them.
Moose Girl 08, you're 100% right. Their vehicles have computers in them, and law enforcement undoubtedly has pulled out the computer out of Bryan Kohberger's car and tracked where he was going on that time of November 13th, the morning of November 13th, and where he went up after that. Very good point. So it's not just the cell tower information. There's other information, and we talk about circumstantial evidence, and someone's saying it was a setup from the city of Moscow. I love that. There's a conspiracy case in every chat. There's a conspirator. I love it. But let me go back to this gentleman.
In science, as the officer himself says, he knows the path and he deduced which way it would go. But what if there are other roads? We know that people from the WSU also go to Moscow to party, so going there 12 times could have an innocent explanation.
You know what, Brian? I actually think the cell phone data coupled with the video footage of the white Elantra is plenty to convince a jury that Kohberger is the killer. We know that Kohberger's phone was at his residence at 2:42 on December 13th, and then it traveled south. 5 minutes later, the phone stopped sending signals, meaning that it was either turned off or placed on airplane mode. The phone is then turned back on at 4:48 a.m. In addition to the cell phone evidence, the authorities have corroborating video of Kohberger's white Elantra at the scene of the crime beginning at 3:39 a.m. on the 13th. The car was ultimately seen leaving the student residence at about 4:20 at a high speed of rate. All of this might be circumstantial evidence, but it is enough evidence for the jury to conclude that Kohberger was at the scene of the crime when the murders took place. And the evidence also supports the argument that Kohberger intentionally turned his phone off. And as far as I'm concerned, he's trying to avoid detection, and it's a clear consciousness of his guilt.
All right, Tara, I see that, but that's not the only potential problem I see in this case. The fact that we have an eyewitness, Dylan, of the suspect is huge, and the description could definitely be Kohberger. I think it's fair to say that everyone immediately went to his eyebrows when we heard the report, so let's go there. I'm on the fence. Does Kohberger have thin eyebrows? No, I don't think anyone's going to say that. But does he have bushy eyebrows? Bushy to the point that they would be an identifying feature when a person is wearing a mask? I think that's where reasonable minds can disagree, and that may cause doubt. The prosecution, of course, will parade a picture of him with the bushiest eyebrows, and the defense will get a picture where his eyebrows look thin. He's no Eugene Levy, though. Lev, sorry. Now, Dylan will be cross-examined on her sobriety that night, how much she slept, the lighting, which could raise more than just questions. But it's not just his appearance, but how she came about it. She was that close to the killer, and he didn't attack her. She was frozen, so scared, but never checked on her friends or called the police for another 8 hours. That may raise a few eyebrows.
You know what, Brian? I do admit that the identification is not foolproof, but it was clear and it was concise. Based on DM's statement, we know that the homicide occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Now, remember, DM heard the dog barking. She heard Kaylee say that someone is here. She heard crying sounds, and she heard a male's voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Plus, she saw a person matching Kohberger's general description pass right by her. And like you said, she basically stood in frozen shock. That would give her plenty of time to check him out and know his appearance. So she described his appearance, his approximate height, his weight, his facial hair, and of course, that description could match multiple people, but only one person matching that description drove a white Elantra that was there at the time of the murders. And based on all that, I have very little doubt that he is the suspect.
Well, I don't know what to believe within that ping pong match between you both, but I think we definitely.
So you see, I mean, look, everything can be argued.
Sure.
For every offense, there's a defense. For every piece of evidence, there's someone that will try to poke a hole in it. Caro from the chat, video footage of all the residences and businesses, car telemetry, and pattern of behavior. He won't be able to explain all of it. Caro, I love the word you use, car telemetry. Excellent. I love that you explain that. Someone, oh yeah, here we are. Sinead, I don't want to ignore you because I disagree with you. Bryan was driving a different year Elantra than what law enforcement set out to be on the lookout for. Sinead, but they were identifying the Elantra from video. They didn't get to see it in person up close. So you can understand how they could make a mistake on the year from identifying from video, because video, even though television and the media would have us think that it's an immediate identifier, it's not as clear as seeing it in person or being up on top of it. So, yeah, the FBI made a mistake, but then match that up with the other evidence and you connect the dots, and it's understandable. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, law enforcement did a great job, and they were off. They knew it was a Hyundai. They knew it was like a 2012, 2016. You know, they didn't have a lot of video on it. And remember, these are security cameras. These are probably old security cameras. I think one of them was at some gas station, convenience store kind of thing. And he was driving by, and the vehicle was driving by. You can't even see inside very well. So it's probably pretty poor in terms of the number of pixels, you know, however you want to measure the exactness of the frame. But yeah, it doesn't matter. What matters is you've got all these coincidences. The phone going off in Washington, the phone going back on in Washington like 2.5 hours later. To me, but as that lady said, it's consciousness of guilt. You know, the eyebrows.
Oh,
yeah,
Mike, she used your expression. You may have to get her to pay for that. You know,
I was so happy about that. I was like, yes, yes. But yeah, it's not, you know, when you're looking at grainy video of a car speeding by late at night from a security camera that's not actually pointed directly at the car, it's pointed to the side, and you just see it on an angle. You know, it's not intended for the purpose that, you know, it's probably really looking at some other part of the area. So you just put it all together, and it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be very, very grainy, and that's the way it goes. Then you start to look around. Okay, who's got one of those cars? You know, that sort of thing. So it's a process. You, Phil, and I've talked about this. It's a process. So I hope for Kohberger's sake that his whole defense won't be premised on the fact that the FBI said it was 2012 rather than 2015 or something early on. It's a good point. It's a very good point, very astute, but it won't be much for the defense to really argue that the FBI very early on was off by a year based on really grainy TV.
Absolutely. Olive Green from the chat. QQQ, have you ever had a case where a witness doesn't call the police for 8 hours after a violent attack? Would she have actually heard them? You know, QQQ, no, I have never. I can't explain why Dylan Mortensen didn't call the police right away. If she thought she heard something that was a violent attack, how about the fact that she saw a male in the house? The only explanation I could have for that was that house frequently had people in it that no one, the occupants didn't know. There were people coming and going. It was a college house. I don't know if you've been to college, Olive Green. I have, and you know, you probably have too. And you can live in a house like that where it's just sort of an open door policy, and that can happen. But no, I can't explain Dylan Mortensen's actions. I was not privy to interviewing her after this occurred. I would like to know what she said. But how about this? How about throwing this into the mix? What if Dylan Mortensen can 100% identify Bryan Kohberger? And you may say, well, how could that be? Well, because he was wearing a mask, right? You're right. The defense will poke holes in that. But when you see someone and they have a mask on, and you can see their eyes, and you can see she described as bushy eyebrows. You see their whole body, their gait, their manner, the way they move. In this case, heard his voice. Could she possibly identify him? Mike?
Yes, she could. Yes, she could. It would be you got to be very careful if you're Bill Thompson, because if she doesn't identify him, then it just kills the case. But in just one respect. But yeah, someone got a facial mask and is covering their face, but it leaves the eyes open. That's what you're concentrating on. You're looking right at the eyes. She described him, I think, early on in the arrest affidavit about he was tall, slim, almost 6 feet with bushy eyebrows. That describes Bryan Kohberger, tall, slim, about 6 feet tall with bushy eyebrows. So she did a pretty good job when it was 4:44, 45 in the morning, and she's had a few to drink and she's half awake. That's a pretty darn good description.
Absolutely. Caro, personally interested in finding more about him from a psychological viewpoint, and there was quite a lot emerging. Yes, consciousness of guilt seems quite chill to be in jail while he crafts a defense. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. We don't hear any reports of his behavior. I'm sure he's in protective custody. A high-profile inmate like that certainly will be in protective custody. Olive Green, poor girl, that must have been so traumatic, and I can't imagine having to testify after this. Exactly. Sinead O'Connor, if Dylan testified under oath, I would believe her. Yeah, I mean, look, as Professor Mike said, it's a slippery slope, because if she says she can ID him, again, the defense will rip that to shreds. How could you identify somebody that was wearing a mask and all you saw was his eyes and his bushy eyebrows? They'll try to rip that to shreds. The other thing is, if you were so threatened by him, why didn't you call 911? So that could potentially destroy her testimony. So I would want to know if Bill Thompson, the Latah County prosecutor, would present that as evidence or hold it back and let the defense call her as a witness. That's a possibility too. Don't you think, Mike?
Yes, they could. If I think Bill Thompson's got, he's got to be very careful. He's a veteran prosecutor. She gave that description, and that description ultimately matched Kohberger, which is perfect. She never picked him out of a lineup. She probably was never asked to pick him out of a lineup, that sort of thing. So we don't have one of those formal IDs with the defense attorney there, behind the glass, nothing like that. But it's quite a coincidence that the person that she described is walking through that house, walking pretty much right past her, pretty much fits the description of Bryan Kohberger. I think if I'm Bill Thompson and I call her, I'm just going to leave it like that. Let her tell her story. And don't do one of those dramatic things like, the person that you saw that night, are they in the courtroom? That sort of thing. Point them out. No, I think he would downplay that. Let her tell her story. Let Ann Taylor try to pick her apart. If he doesn't call her, I think that would be kind of odd. If he doesn't, then you're missing that witness, because that actually places a guy about 6 feet tall, bushy eyebrows, and a slim build right in the house. If you don't, and say Ann Taylor wants to call her later on in an offenses case, I think that would be a trap for Ann Taylor, because Ann Taylor, the moment Ann Taylor starts to try to attack her, okay, you're going to attack a 19-year-old girl. Okay, that's great for you. But guess what? The moment you finish trying to rip her apart, guess what? Bill Thompson's going to get up and on cross is going to say, please tell the jury, what the description of the man was that you saw that night. And she's going to say it. And then the jury's going to look over to Bryan Kohberger. So you have to handle this really carefully, both from a prosecution side and both the defense side. I think if I'm Bill Taylor, she'll be one of the first people up there, get her off, get her on the stand and get her off the stand, and just be very general, because she's got really good knowledge, but she didn't see things in the light of day, completely sober with lights on and no mask on. So you got to be very careful how you handle her.
Absolutely. One of the big things about this case also was that house that everyone argued over. Should it be knocked down? Should it be preserved for the trial? And as we all know, it was knocked down. So I want to play. They did great painstaking job to go over this with lasers and make sure they had all the evidence.
5 plainclothes investigators. We don't know if they're local, state, federal. They were inside, and we saw a lot of activity inside the home, and the home was lit up. So we were able to peek in some of the windows, but we saw those men inside the home in the 2 particular rooms where the murders took place. We did not see them leaving with any materials. I asked them a couple of times, why are they back? They did not answer me. They pulled away in 2 vehicles. One had a Washington state plate. The other had an Idaho plate. But that is all we can tell you. But we did see a lot of activity. This house was lit up for nearly an hour. They were inside. We don't know why. Nothing seemed to be removed. But as you know, Ashley, yesterday, a lot of the kids' belongings were removed by Moscow police to be returned to their families.
So I'm just watching these guys as they're walking by you. Were you asking them questions, and were they effectively just ignoring you? Did they say hello? Did they say anything at all?
Not a peep. And I asked them specifically, why are you here tonight? Why are you here tonight? They did not acknowledge me. So certainly they were on a mission, and they left without saying a word.
So Nancy, I just want to point out the video that we're seeing right now. Let's blow this up full, because and let's replay that if we can too. This is the investigators walking out of the kitchen area into a hallway and then walking towards the living room. So there they are. It looks like they're emerging from the kitchen area, walking towards the front of the house. That grassy sign that's on the wall right there, that's the good vibes sign. There's actually 2 of those signs in the house. It's very confusing. There's a good vibes sign that was lit up in Kaylee Gonsalves's room. And there's also that same grassy good vibes sign right down there that faces the front in the living room. So they're walking out of the kitchen area and walking towards the front of the house in the living room on the 2nd floor there. But that's the first time, Nancy, that we've actually been able to see them at work inside the house.
Right. And looking inside, we did see, so many signs of a typical college life, the items that we saw, red Solo cups, we saw a beer bottle, and there you see the window with the shades drawn, but you see the shadows of them working in that room. But yeah, they were inside. They seemed to be targeted in where they were going and what they were doing, and then they left without a word. Even though I tried to get some comments out of them.
Yeah, it's curious about the kitchen, because we're still trying to get confirmation as to whether, the killer entered through that back kitchen sliding door. But, listen, on a crime scene, they're going to look at every inch of that house. I am interested when you said that there was a Washington plate, because the very first thing I thought of when I saw those guys is they don't look local necessarily. And I don't say that because they don't look like they're from Idaho. It just looks like they're moving in a particularly specific way. Yeah. And this late in the game, it just screams FBI to me, and maybe an FBI field office that's partially from Washington, maybe an FBI field office from the Idaho area. But did you ask if they were from FBI or what jurisdiction? And they just said, nothing to see here?
Yeah, they would not. They would give me nothing. And I did call Moscow police, no answer, no response. So no explanation for any of this, but they were clearly inside on a mission.
I mean, 25 days of processing a crime scene, to me, it's something I haven't really seen, unless it's, a massive school shooting. That could take 25 days because there's just so many victims and so much territory and so many markings. This one is a really unusual complexity. I can only think it's because there's just so many samples in that house over the years and over the times that the kids have been there that I'm still shocked they only have 113 pieces of evidence. Nancy, thank you for getting that video and for being the eagle eye and spotting that. Really.
So yeah, Mike, we argued and we covered this case from the beginning that we were totally against them knocking the house down. And because we felt that when this case goes to trial, which it's going to go to trial, we felt the jurors should have been allowed to walk through this house to get to feel what it was like, to get to feel what the victims, what it was like for them, to get to feel what the killer, retrace his path through that house. And it's not the same having a video recreation of it. It's not the same of having laser recreation of it. It's not the same of looking at photos of it. It's just not the same. You're not feeling, you're not touching, you're not smelling. And that's why I was so against knocking that house down. And I didn't like the way it was done. I still don't like that it was done. And I think it really is prejudicial to the case. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Billy, it only can help the defense. It can't help the prosecution. The prosecution needs to have something like that in their back pocket towards the end of their case in chief when they want to walk people through that crime scene. Let them see it. Let them smell it. It's going to be really awful, but let them take a walk through that. And so it can clear up in their minds as they're walking through, okay, the person's accused of going this way or that way. How far up the stairs is it? Is it noisy in the house? Because that's really important about what Dylan and the other Bethany may have heard or what they saw. You know, what's the noise level like when there's a few people in that house? Yeah, I don't think it helps anybody but the defense. And I'm sorry that Bill Thompson and the prosecutor agreed to have it taken down. It only helps the defense.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. You know, since so many people were interested in what Howard Bloom had to say about this, I'm just going to play a short little snippet about him from Law and Crime. And again, he's not an expert on anything. He's a writer.
University grad student who was arrested 6 weeks after the brutal stabbing of University of Idaho students Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. Why would he do this, as prosecutors allege? Why would a complete stranger murder 4 people in cold blood back in November of 2022? We don't have a trial date set. We don't know exactly how prosecutors are going to lay out the story. We do know there's quite a bit of evidence that prosecutors plan to use to prove that Bryan Kohberger is the killer: DNA, surveillance footage, cell phone data, potential eyewitness. But again, why? Well, there is a new book that has come out, and it is by best-selling author Howard Bloom, that explores some of these questions, and it offers a potential explanation for what happened. It's called When the Night Comes Falling, A Requiem for the Idaho Student Murders. And Howard Bloom joins me right now. Good to see you, sir. Thank you so much for coming on. So here's the book. It just came out, what, today? Yesterday. Today, okay. Oh, yesterday. So here's the question I have for you. Everybody's been fascinated about this case. I'm not surprised you wrote a book about it because people are fascinated about it, but how did you get involved in studying what happened here?
It happened really by accident. 2 years ago, we're sitting around the Thanksgiving table. We had finished discussing politics, family matters.
That's dangerous, but yeah.
And the talk turned to this perplexing murder that just occurred in Idaho about a week earlier. So I hadn't been following the case then, but all weekend it sort of stayed in my mind. And I texted Graydon Carter, who ran Airmail magazine, and Graydon said, sure, go on out for us. We'll pay your bills. And I went out there, not really just to report on it, but I thought, I've been a former Times reporter, put on my trench coat, I go out there and I'll try to solve the case. Because no one had gotten to the bottom of things. So I get there. I'm there for like several couple.
No one had gotten to the bottom of things. The case just started. New York Times reporter, you're really going to solve this case? I don't think so.
Couple of days, and I think, well, I've got this figured out, because the house is sort of in a gully. There's houses around it. I would figure someone from one of those houses, one of the areas, would see these kids. They're full of ebullience, exuberance, beauty, and he'd feel on the outside of things, and that would have sent him sort of ragefully.
So before we even get into the theories that you lay out in the book, which I find are fascinating, I think a big question is, and I was surprised by it too, Why publish a book about this before the trial?
It's a very good question, something I gave a lot of thought to. What I've done, and this is my 16th book, I was a reporter at the New York Times, I wrote for Vanity Fair as a contributing editor for a lot of years, and what I do is I tell true stories, but I tell stories. And I think this is an important story with a beginning, a middle, and an end right now. The subtitle of the book is The Requiem for the Idaho Student Murders, and it's a story that's supposed to be a loving remembrance of these children who've lost their lives. It's also a police thriller in many ways, a procedural of how the police caught this man, and it's really an answer to a puzzle of what happened. And I'm able to tell it really as a cross-country journey that the father and son take. And in this journey where I was able to get some new information, I lay out a story that aspires to be a narrative that people can enjoy. So I thought now's the time to write about it.
Let's talk about that puzzle. So one of the big pieces of this book is you have a theory as to why, if Bryan Kohberger really did do this, who he was targeting. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first, emphasize what you said. It's my theory, my suspicion. Right. The prosecution and defense, one of the few things they agree on is that there was never any interaction between Kohberger, either in person or on social media, with any of the victims. I say that's perhaps not so true. If one looks at the course of what happened that night, Kohberger enters the house on the second floor through the kitchen sliding door. There are 2 bedrooms right adjacent to the kitchen. He could have gone into either of those bedrooms. Instead, he pursues as if a man on a mission up a narrow staircase and goes into Maddie Mogan's bedroom. He finds inside that bedroom not just Maddie, but Kaylee. He had really no idea that Kaylee was there. She's not really living in the house anymore. She's up in North in Coeur d'Alene. She's getting ready to graduate and she's doing an internship there. So I believe that he had at one point in the Mad Greek restaurant where he would go for, which is in downtown Moscow, he goes there for vegan food. He met Maddie, didn't even have to talk with her. He was a man who was prone to obsessions, his heroin addiction, his decision to lose 125 pounds, his decision to go from a low-ranking community college to a top-ranking graduate school in criminology. He threw himself into things. And for some reason, her beauty, her exuberance, her vitality, her blondness even, that attracted Bryan Kohberger, I believe. A killer.
He made all of this up. Right. He feels this. He has no evidence of it. So, I mean, how could, why is he getting all this traction then? He feels this. There's no evidence. And was there any evidence that he used to go into the Mad Greek restaurant and order vegan food? I thought that was sort of disqualified also. So where is this? These are his feelings. And for that, you write a novel and putting it out there almost, and as people are interviewing him as if he knows what direction the killer took because he feels it. That's called a hunch, Mike. And I used to get them when I was on a police department. I'd have a hunch, but you know something? Many of my hunches didn't come true. And I used to have a detective that was always hypothesizing and theorizing. And most of his hypothesizing and theorizing theories weren't true. They never came true. So he's writing a book about this, and just because he feels it. And I'm not getting it. Are you getting it, Mike?
Billy, he's an excellent writer, but I'm not getting it because every time you have a theory, and you want to prove that theory, you have to have some sort of research and concrete evidence, not just a hypothesis and then a theory and then a feeling and an instinct and intuition. No, that's really great that he's thinking of all these things, but do not write it in a book and try to sell it as this is I've gone out there with my trench coat and I solved the case.
When I heard that, I wanted to almost vomit.
I want to cry. I wanted to cry.
Going out there with his friend. Part of that, when one detective used to say, I would say, Joe, I had to use his first name, not his last name. Joe, stop hypothesizing and theorizing and start typerizing your reports,
Right.
Because you're doing a lot of hypothesization and theorizing, but it means nothing unless we have evidence to prove your hypothesis and your theory is absolutely true. And guess what? It's not. Let me play a little more of this and then we'll dissect it.
Needs two things, someone to love and someone to hate. And either he loved the image that she projected so much and hated himself for being on the outside of it, or he hated her and felt she was a constant rebuke to everything that he was trying to become.
Why do you say that? Because first of all, and to back up and to be clear, you're not suggesting that anybody who has some sort of drug addiction will have an obsession with a person, right? They might have an addiction to a drug. Doesn't mean they're obsessed with. There's something specific about something about Kohberger.
An obsessive personality.
Okay.
I think you can see a pattern of a personality that falls into obsessive beliefs, obsessive behavior, and that's been the story of his life. And for whatever reason, and I wish I could speak with him. Have
you tried?
I've tried everything. It's pretty hard to get to Bryan Kohberger
You won't
right
say
now.
anything while this is legal case is going on.
And I don't think he's allowed to by the gag order.
Right.
That's another problem with this case. To digress for a second, this gag order is so restrictive that it's allowed anyone with any knowledge to speak on the record. Anyone I spoke to, I had to speak to off the record. And in this vacuum of authoritative comments on the case, the vacuum is filled with half-truths, lies, innuendos, and outright vicious accusations that fill the internet.
There's a part of your book where you talk about the idea of that night in question. And a lot of piece of the evidence is that he had been allegedly circling that area multiple times. Now, some would say he was stalking it, trying to scope it out. You have a different explanation for what might have been happening there.
I believe that he was not stalking the area. If he was stalking the area, he would have seen all the cars in the driveway. He would have seen the DoorDash delivery at 4 a.m., and that would have deterred him. That if he was out to make the perfect crime, he would have thought twice about it. What was going on in the person driving the white car's mind, I believe, and again, this is my supposition, he was trying to find the will, trying to cross over from the world he was living in into this manic state where he could have the power to kill, to take someone's life. And he was trying to escape from it. He was trying to, every time he drove away, he was hoping, I can get away from this. But like a magnet, these demons pulled him back, and he ultimately could not escape. And when the car stops at the top of the hill and he turns off the ignition, the killer, I think it took the strength of Hercules for the killer to do that and then make up his mind. Then he was committed to these murders.
So just to clarify that point, you don't think he set out that night, left his campus, left where he was living to go murder somebody? Would that be fair to say?
No, I think,
or was he?
His mindset was he was ready to murder, but as soon as he got there, he tried to pull back, and he tried to pull back not once, not twice, but 3 times. For all we know, there might have been another night when he tried to commit this crime too, and was successfully able to pull back.
In other words, and by the way, we're speculating here. We have to be clear.
Yes.
But the evidence that he had been in that area multiple times before, you suggest that could have been opportunities that he was looking to strike. Or I don't know.
Yes, or trying to come to terms with this, or what I think part of it was, he was on the periphery of these events, and he was looking into everything that's happening at that party house. I think that.
And you believe that based on his background? He was on the outside looking in.
Yes, and also,
one of the things to me that's disturbing about this is that Howard Bloom is not a psychologist. He's not a law enforcement officer. He has no experience into the minds of criminals, or no experience in tracking or following criminals. And yet he's making these assumptions, which is all they are. And remember what we learned as kids about the word assume. It makes an ass of you or me, And look, I've followed hundreds, thousands of criminals under surveillance. And I know lots of times criminals do a recon. And yeah, they are trying to get the nerve to do what they set out to do. And there's evidence that he set out to do this, because what did he do that, Mike, and I'll use your term again,
Consciousness of guilt.
what did he do? What was the big thing he did?
The big thing was turning off the cell phone.
100%. I didn't even have to ask you the question. That shows.
Who turns off their cell phone?
Right. He turned off his cell phone to do this crime that he set out to do. So, right. Mr. Bloom, good try, but this is all fiction. Your book is all fiction. And that's, again, you're an outstanding writer, but you don't know what you're talking about, and it's just, does this help or hurt the case at this point?
Billy, I hope that no one buys the book and no one reads the book until perhaps sometime in the future after the case is over, because if people read it, they'll kind of assume that the information he's put in there is information that he's gleaned through maybe some sort of police files, some sort of investigation that he was let privy to. No, this is all open source material. And I think it does a disservice. So I hope no one in Idaho who may be a potential juror buys the book. And if you're thinking about it, because maybe he is a very good writer, wait till all this is over, but this is, I think, a disservice, and it could muddy the waters. You never know. Ann Taylor, this could play into Ann Taylor's hand, because you could say, look, people are buying this book like crazy in Idaho. Our potential jury pool has been reading this book. It's in circulation. It's in the local Barnes and Nobles. It's been selling. You don't want to have that sort of thing. I think Bill Thompson, if I'm him, I'm really upset. If I'm Ann Taylor, I'm like, bring it on, muddy the waters.
Another thing, when someone speaks off the record, they very well could be telling you untruths,
right?
Because they're not speaking by giving their name and almost swearing, or like an affidavit or something like we've heard before, which also doesn't mean if you're telling the truth.
That's right.
But if someone's speaking off the record, what reason do they have to give you the whole truth and nothing but the truth? So help me God. They don't.
That's right. That's right. They may be looking to curry a favor from you. They may just be looking to impress you. So it sounds great off the record, and it may be accurate. People kind of assume it's accurate, but you're right. If it's off the record, there's no, guarantees in any way, shape, or form that what you're getting is anything more than third-party rumor, hearsay from somebody heard something that they thought somebody else heard, or somebody else heard that from another person. You don't know. But if it fits into his book, it fits into his kind of way of writing and his ideas of where he wants to go with this book, he'll throw it in there. But it is dangerous to assume that what you've heard third hand is actually factually accurate.
100%. Kami from the chat gifted one police off the cuff membership. Kami, thank you so much. Very much appreciated. We could go on and on and on, but we're at almost an hour and 40. We're at an hour and 43 minutes. And I find this story with Howard Bloom pretty interesting, because, it just gives you a sort of a look into media and how media gives someone the platform to speak about and to sell their book. And I'm sort of a little perturbed by it, because how is this man? All right, he's written 16 prior books. He was a writer for New York. How does it give him any credibility in knowing anything about the investigation of this case, law enforcement collecting evidence, who Bryan Kohberger was target? Like, how can you answer that question, Mike?
Yeah, Billy, look, he started this book out like James Patterson started the book out. Things were hot and heavy early on in the investigation. They made the arrest. It was a big flurry of activity. He wants to write the book. Great. He probably never thought it would go past, say, this summer, like summer of 2024. He probably thought back in 2022, this would be over by 2024. And maybe, to me, I think he just wants to end this project and move on to something else. And maybe he'll write a part 2 when the trial's over. But I think he just wanted to get this project done. And I think it's a disservice to people.
Mike, I think writers with this book, they smell a cash cow.
Sure.
they smell a bestseller because the story is a bestseller. The story itself is a horrific story of 4 great kids murdered on a college campus. And all of us, actually not off the college campus, I don't want to say on the college, off the college campus, but all students at the University of Idaho, we all have kids. We've all had kids who have gone away to colleges. That all our fears are aligned with what happened to these young kids and just a horrific situation. So it's right away of interest to almost every human being on this planet. So I could see that writers and publishers, they smell a cash cow. And I think by putting out a book before the story is over, there's no finality to it. There's no, the bad guy gets what he deserves and the good guys get justice. There's no finality. Instead, there's innuendo, there's presumption, and there's interviewing people that can't give their name because of the gag order. So I question the validity of his book. And again, he's a great writer. I read his stuff in Airmail magazine, which is this book. Mm-hmm. He put out chapters, and the chapters came out in Airmail magazine, and now the book is over. But he's getting all kinds of media plays, being interviewed all over the place, and that gives him some type of credibility. Mike, I'm sorry to have to keep you on so late today, but this was a hell of an interesting show.
Sure.
I might add myself, and I'm part of it, hosting it. I thought it was pretty damn interesting, and let me tap myself on the back, and you too. But I want to thank everyone today that tuned in. I know there's so much going on YouTube with everyone's awaiting the Karen Reed verdict, and I thought it would be a good time to get the YouTube audience their minds on something else. I would imagine that verdict hasn't come up yet, but anyway, Mike, your final thoughts.
Final thought: you got to go back to the victims here, Miss Gonsalves, Miss Mogan, Zaina Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. That's what it's all about. This is not about Howard Bloom and his suppositions. It's all about them and nothing else but them, and justice for them and the county of Latah and the people of the city of Moscow. That's what it's all about.
100%. I don't think I could have said it any better myself, so I won't try. So, folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. On behalf of myself and Professor Mike Geary, have a great day and God bless.
Okay.
One episode just ain't enough.